have a nurse that used to work with me, and she would ask the patients when they would call, "Are you on opiates? Because Dr. Uma doesn't write those, so you better find somebody else." So I haven't been writing opioids in over 15 years. And you're right. As a physician, the doctors write the opioids, they're all good to go.
Mm,
But when a doctor starts talking about cannabis, you're not in the group of people that accept you. But it's changing.
mhm.
It's changing.
You and I didn't get to technically meet, but I think you and Nick had a good time at the event, right?
We met, he was there
Yeah.
briefly, but I didn't have a chance. I had to rush out also that night. So I was there, but it was, this is where everything comes together because I had not planned to be here at that time. And I was here. And then Teresa, I saw the event. So it was just serendipitously, we all got to meet. So it's all wonderful.
Yeah, I love it when plans work out like that. Now, according to my secret comma police files on you, and I have been stressing pronouncing your name correctly, but you are Dr. Uma Dhanabalan. Is that correct?
No,
No. Oh,
they like to pronounce
hang
it
on.
that way, but I try to correct them and I
Can,
go,
can I get a
it's
second?
close enough. It's
Yeah,
Donna Ballin.
Donna Ballin.
I know the
She's
H kind of throws people off a little bit, but it's Donna Ballin.
and
Dhanabalan.
to tell you the truth, Dr. Uma, I think were you at the Veterans for Cannabis event in Atlanta also a few months ago?
I am not sure, hon. I don't think so. I was here, let's see, I've been here in December and then I left and then I came back again. So who knows? You
Who
never know.
knows? Well, because James Messnier was there, and I think I mispronounced his name too because it looks like I want to say people's name really fancy, like Messnier, but it's probably something like Messner. So,
Very
but
easy. I just go by James. It's so funny.
yeah. So according to my files, you're the founder and the CEO at Uplifting Health and Wellness. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're
I
also
am
the
the
founder.
founder. I still, believe it or not, I have the T-shirt on today. But I'm actually the founder of Global Health and Hygiene Solutions, which was created in 2006, and with a mission to promote wellness and prevent illness was the mission, even before cannabis ever became part of my radar. Because Uplifting Health and Wellness was created in 2014, and that we use three words: educate, embrace, empower. Because uplifting health and wellness is when cannabis became part of my toolkit in preventing illnesses and promoting wellness. So, my base and the foundation is truly about prevention. And that's always been my foundation because I finished med school and then I really found out about the importance of preventative health. And that's how I ended up doing my second career.
Mm. Now we recorded last night with Dave, who isn't here with us tonight today, and we were discussing you, and me and Nick were saying, I said, whenever you're listening to speakers on any given topic, when you leave, it isn't so much. Sometimes you don't even remember exactly what they said or the points, but it's the impression that they left. And I'm a speaker and a writer, so it's like I can tell the difference between when someone's coming from their heart and when they're coming from a script. And I do remember, I think Nick was holding the camera when you were giving your talk, but I remember there were a lot of wet eyes in the place. Uh, and the overall feeling that you left was the most impressionable one. And, Nick was discussing on the podcast last night that should go out today, what he took from it, which is your point of view of let's keep the plant safe, not dangerous. And one of the things that always strikes me is, well, what got me into cannabis activism and plant-based activism anyway, which is my origin story of the tragedy that occurred in my life. And so I know that Nick and I have heard your story, but our listeners haven't heard the story. But if you could tell us, tell us your origin story. Where did you come from? How did you, what was it that brought you into the realm of plant-based medicine as preventative and as a holistic thing? What was that?
I think it really comes truly from my roots. I'm originally from India, and I was born in Bombay. And Bombay is not where my parents originally are from. They're from South India. So I kind of describe India as an ice cream cone, and the little drop on the side is Sri Lanka, sort of like the little drop dripping from an ice cream cone. So my family's from the southeast part of India, and I was born in North India. And India has about 18 different languages and about 250 different dialects. And when I grew up in Bombay, my parents' whole mission was about education. They left a wonderful life in India um, to pursue education for both their children. And my mother was the first woman in South India to get her master's in statistics. My dad was a chemical engineer and very much involved with cosmetics, oil industry, and also the pharmaceutical industry, and worked for Park Davis. And so as a child, I remember going with him to the plants. I remember going with my mom to school. And we were structured in where it was about family and also about education. And we decided to come to the United States in 1970. My parents decided to move here, and my father had come here in June of 1970, and my mother came with my brother and myself in December. My brother had just turned 7, and I was 8 years old. And coming to this country, I believe America to be the land of opportunity. I truly believe that. And anything and everything that you are willing to work hard for, you can achieve. I truly believe that also. And my grandmother, my father's mother, was a shaman, and she didn't read and write, but she looked at you and knew what was going on. She was the village doctor. So growing up, I remember her rubbing ointments. Literally, we would call it shaken baby syndrome now, but they would do massages and literally shake the baby for colickiness. And I remember her making different kinds of tinctures, different types of plant material that she herself had used to treat patients. And that's where I really believe part of my roots come from, is the fact of healing and being able to use plants and what we know today to be Ayurvedic medicine. Ayu means life and Veda means knowledge. There's also Siddha medicine, which also involves using other metals and other elements. But Ayurveda is really, truly life to me. And cannabis was listed as Ayurvedic medicine, and it's a sacred plant. So having this as my foundation is what brought me to this country. And I always said I was going to be a doctor. And my parents remember me saying that from about when I was 3 years old. So I guess it's been in me of caregiving and taking care of people. Fast forward, I finished high school when I was 16 years old. I was probably one of the youngest kids in my class. And my journey has continued, and I still consider myself a student of life. And I still love to learn and attend whatever and learn more things. I decided that prevention has always been something that was instilled in us, and medical school has always been many different turnstiles for me. I started med school actually 4 times. I started the first time in 1979 when my parents decided we'll go to India because we can't afford to send you to medical school here, and it's too many years. And as a blessing, I ended up getting sick in India. I ended up having hepatitis the first year I was there. I'd come home for the summer, get admitted to the hospital, went home back to India for the second year and got malaria, came back. And my parents at that point said, did we send you to be the doctor or the patient? And truly, I think it's come full circle in understanding that I say all patients are not healthcare providers, yet all healthcare providers are patients.
Right.
Mhm.
And this is something that I want everybody to understand. We will be a patient at some time in our lives. And how do we want to be treated? What do we want? And what are our expectations? And what I realize also is that I came back, and by the grace of God, it was meant to be that I was not going to be a foreign medical graduate. So I started again here in 1984, the second time, and got in a car accident 1 month into medical school. Had to stop. Started again in 1985, 2 months into the program, had another accident. And I said, that's it, 3 strikes, you're out. I'm not meant to be in this. I left. All along, from the time I was probably 8 years old, I had been going to work with my mom or my dad. And I started to work in the research laboratories in the hospital. And I went back to that because I had been doing that for over 20 years at that point. And I had been doing research from tissue culture, human research, animal research, and creating different types of models. And I was very much involved with diabetes, hypertension, cancer patients, infertility, and surgical, and the list goes on. I worked in many different departments, but I understood what research was. So I decided to go back and do research, and also decided to do some traveling. And I had my son, in the midst of all of this, I had an arranged marriage. I went home, got married. I met my husband for 1 hour and got married and had the greatest gift, which is our son. And I decided to be a mother at that point. I had my son and I was working, but the desire to be a doctor never left me. And I decided when my son was about a year and a half old, I remember going back to my parents and saying, I'm ready. And they said, okay, we'll support you and help you. So I always say my MD stands for mom and dad. My mom's name is Mina and my dad goes by DeRay. So I always say Mina and DeRay is truly my MD stands for. And after I had my
I,
son,
I always thought it meant minor deity.
but honestly, that's where my MD stands for. And with a son that was about less than 2 years old, and my husband at that time was in India, and I was here working part-time and decided to go to med school full-time. And it was time. It was time for me to be a doctor, and I finished med school in 1995 and then did my residency in Charleston, South Carolina in family medicine. And people even thought I was crazy then when I decided to go to the South. And they said,
Now, when you came from India to the States, was it in New Jersey,
yes, I grew up in New
Livingston?
Jersey.
Well,
Well,
I'm actually traveling up to New Jersey this month, as a matter of fact. So when I noticed in our files on you, which is Facebook, it has all the information. I was like, she's from New Jersey. Well, sort of. But
I'm a
anyway, go ahead.
Jersey girl. I'm proud of it too.
So
Very proud.
yeah, and I love and I'm a Southerner. We're here in Georgia, and before I took my first trip up to New Jersey, everybody's like, "Oh, you're going to meet some rude people," but I love it up there. It's my second home, so I know what you're talking about with the people saying you're going down to the South from there. But please go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, not at all. It's true though, because I love being a Jersey girl and I say it everywhere I go. But when we first came to this country, we lived in Paterson, New Jersey. And then we moved to Clifton, and then we moved to Lake Hiawatha, and then Livingston is where I graduated high school from. And I still have friends in all those places, which is really nice. And I try to keep in touch with my old friends. But honestly, medical school was a journey of its own. And I have a rock solid foundation. You know, medical school in Newark, New Jersey, doing research for now over 40, 50 years of my life, and having a earning to continuously learn. And that's what I really believe, that we're not done learning, and we should always have that curiosity. And I've always had that curiosity since I was a little kid. But it was when I was at MUSC in Charleston, South Carolina, I really realized that I wanted to pursue preventative health. And my journey brought me to Harvard School of Public Health, and I did my second life there. In order to do a residency in preventative medicine, I had to do my master's in public health, more studying. So I studied, I did my master's in public health. I did my residency, my second residency in occupational environmental medicine, and that's a subspecialty of preventative health. And that's where I really learned the importance of exposures, exposures to what we work in, exposures in our environment. And I fell in love with lead, and I decided to do a fellowship in heavy metals. And my research project in lead made me understand that how we make laws thinking we know what we know, the best we know at that time. And OSHA was created in 1970, the same year I came to this country. 1970 is a very unique year because the DEA was created, OSHA was created, and we also created the concept of Controlled Substance Act was created at that time, and we placed cannabis in Schedule 1, where it is today still.
I'm going to bite my tongue until you're done, but please continue.
No, we need to, please stop me, because this is when you realize that we think we know so much, and yet we still don't want to correct ourselves even after we know the facts. That I have a problem with. And as a medical doctor, I'm struggling with that with my own colleagues, because we were taught, where's the evidence? Well, there's not only evidence, but there's people's lives that I could look at every day and know that that's the evidence. And I'm proud of what I do. I don't think I felt that way when I first started to get involved with cannabis. But it was not until 2010 that I learned that we had an endocannabinoid system. And it was because my mother was diagnosed with an illness known as idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It's also known as IPF. It's a fancy term for we don't know what caused your lung disease. My mother had never smoked. She had never worked in a known exposure, and she was never overweight. She never ate red meats. All the things that to say we don't know what caused your lung disease, but ultimately it's a death sentence. And in 2012, she was given 6 months to live in July 7th, and she lived exactly 6 months to the date. So this is why I always have concerns about telling people, this 6 months, because I really feel that imprints things in people's heads, and what you believe in will happen also.
Absolutely.
And it was my mother that said, they're using ganja. And I knew what that word was. And I beelined it into the bedroom, and she was watching a TV program about how cannabis was being used in Israel for COPD, asthma, lung cancer, and PTSD, because in Israel, everybody had suffered from PTSD. I leave the D, and I want to talk about that too. I'm very, very cautious about the words we use.
Yes.
Because I feel by calling it PTSD, I ain't no disorder and I ain't no disease, is what I want to say. Because it's just post-traumatic stress. Veterans brought the light to it, but today,
It's
I
everybody.
say the whole world,
The whole world.
everything that is going on is suffering from post-traumatic stress. That's what it is. How we cope with it is very different. And post-traumatic stress is what I also suffer with today with my mother's loss. And I can tell that so many people suffer with it, but it's the choices of how you want to treat it. And we live with it. And what we understand is PTS is real now. It's not something that people choose to suffer. It's a real diagnosis. And on the brain, we're seeing how it's real because we can see how two people can be exposed to, let's say, a burning building, and one person is able to walk away and not have any consequences, but another person, the smell of smoke can trigger it, a sound of a fire truck going by, or even somebody lighting up a cigarette, the smell of something that's related to smoke or anything that could trigger it for that day, that incident can take
Mhm.
right back to that level of heightened response
Right.
and feeling like you have no control over that situation at that moment. And what I realized is that after my mother's death, I had to speak out. I had,
Now, before her
Mhm.
before her passing, you were about to get into a story about the ganja. Was she using cannabis before she
no,
passed?
she did not. I never ever got to use this plant for her. And that's where, we realized that the stigma that we
Mhm.
live within our society, here I am, a doctor,
Hmm.
not one degree, multiple degrees, education from multiple parts of the world. And yet, even with my mother that was about to die, I could not speak out. I could not say a daggone word or even look at this as an option for her. And she died in 2012. And I was in the state of Washington working for a federal site, the largest cleanup site for plutonium. And because of my job, because of my position, and because I'm a doctor, and because I like the money and what people
Mhm.
may think about me, I kept my mouth shut.
Here.
Mhm.
I don't keep it shut anymore.
We're aware.
Yes, you are. And that's why I speak so boldly and why I speak so passionately, because I regret many things. But at the same time, I'm very proud because I really believe my mother's death has changed the world. I have not stopped speaking about it. And um, I'm very proud that many people have followed in my footsteps. And I've been told that because of my voice, they're able to speak up. And I am the voice for many people out there, especially our patients.
Well, Dr. Umida, and of course Nick knows this story, and my audience, they know my personal story, but for you to relate it to, I think one of the reasons that whenever, you were speaking at the event where I kind of tuned in, even though I was running back and forth, was um, what brought me to cannabis activism here in Georgia was, yesterday was my dad's birthday, and you and I had spoken about this, the synchronicity and the omens of, and how we all get together, the right people get together at the right time with the right information to do the right things. But in 2012, my father in Georgia had very bad arthritis in his hip. He was a veteran of two foreign wars. He was, my parents were my superheroes, man. That's just the way it was. But I was a Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher at the time. So the stigma of cannabis was like, that's the devil's dirt. You know what I mean? You can't and my dad he was very old fashioned. He didn't do he wouldn't even do prescription drugs,
Yeah.
because of Elvis. But when I would have coffee with my father, I would see him in so much physical anguish, and I said, Dad, and of course I didn't use proper terminology at the time. I said, Dad, I've heard that, weed will help, you with that. If I were to get some of that, would you smoke it for your pain? And I knew my dad was in pain because he looked at me and he said, Yes, son. Well, when you are in the South and you're a Sunday school teacher at a Baptist church and you don't know where on the black market to get it, it takes a minute to even step outside of your own comfort level because you're constantly inundated by the church that this is something that's evil. You know what I mean? So even pushing beyond that was a thing for me. But before I could ever get a hold of any cannabis, my dad, he didn't do prescription pills or painkillers or anything like that, but BC powders, just over the counter acetaminophen. He had taken so much that he had developed an ulcer above his heart and it cut oxygen to his brain. And he actually passed while I was giving him CPR. And that gave me post-traumatic stress, which, which is an eerie, or well, it's the sins of the father visited upon the son. He had PTSD from 2 foreign wars, and then he transferred it to me. And so I remember, now I was already a political activist at the time, but I remember in that moment when they declared it, I was so angry at the state because I was like, let me get this straight. My daddy could have went down to a doctor and got a legal prescription for, or a prescription for legal cocaine, and he could have went to Walgreens, and that's okay. But a plant, an herb that grows out of the ground, he couldn't have that. He would be a criminal. And Dr. Uma, I believe wholeheartedly, because you had to know my daddy, if he had have had access to it, he would still be with me playing poker every weekend. And I got so angry that's when my activism in the state of Georgia for cannabis, began. So it's so I find it very synchronistic that your story, my story, everybody's story is based off of a great loss in regard to this area, specifically in the South. So I guess my other question is did you see a difference in how cannabis is treated from the South to the North in the States and the States and India? Like, what's the spectrum of the way it's viewed, and what are your
Well,
thoughts on that?
it's still viewed as the plant that's, you're a pothead,
Mhm.
ganja user. You're still, even my relatives, even here it is 10 years later, and they're finally seeing the light. They're seeing that Uma's been saying this for how many years? And I've been out there for 2012. Here we are coming up on a decade. And I agree with you. I feel the same way. I believe my mother would have died with dignity. She would have had a better quality of life. And I too believe if she had gotten this, she might be alive today. I really believe that. And that's why I do what I do. Even before I knew about cannabis, I knew opioids were bad. And
Mhm.
in probably about 2006, 2007, I used to have a nurse that used to work with me, and she would ask the patients when they would call, "Are you on opiates? Because Dr. Uma doesn't write those, so you better find somebody else." So I haven't been writing opioids in over 15 years. And you're right. As a physician, the doctors write the opioids, they're all good to go.
Mm.
But when a doctor starts talking about cannabis, you're not in the group of people that accept you. But it's changing.
Mhm.
It's changing. And when I decided to do cannabinoid medicine, I said, I'm going to do it the right way. I saw 2,000 patients. I sat for an exam, and I'm a diplomat in cannabinoid medicine. The people out there writing recommendations right now, they might take one course or whatever the course requirements. They don't spend the time. So I'm appalled at these services that run mills to do certifications for patients because they don't educate the patient. The patient now has spent this money and has a piece of paper and doesn't know a daggone thing, or they're relying on a bud tender.
Mm.
A bud tender, that's the name of the person that's going to give you your medicine.
Right.
These are things that I feel are unacceptable in the way we're approaching how we look at cannabis. We talk about the cannabis as being medical and recreational. So
Mm.
when you go back to that question about how things are viewed, it's still viewed as this plant that people are not looking at the true value of the plant still. It's
Yeah.
changed country by country, place by place. And we do have this thing called Google. I mean, daggone it, if you are at least on any one of these machines look up cannabis. Just look it up and just look at history of cannabis and learn.
Let me ask you this. You said it was after your mother crossed over that you discovered about the endocannabinoid system. They didn't teach you this in medical school?
No, it was actually when in 2010 when she saw the TV program is when I started to learn about it.
but
But
not in medical school.
no, even now, less than I think now, maybe we're up to 20% of the medical schools teach it, but no, it's not taught. And honestly, maybe we didn't know all the details because I started med school, like I said, in 1979 the first time, and then I started in 1991 the last time. But when you look at the understanding of the endocannabinoid system, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam started to work with this in 1964. But in 19, I think 42 or 40 is when CBD was isolated. So 1964 is when he started to work with it and isolated THC. And then we understood that we had our own endocannabinoids, and we understood that there was receptors. And so,
in,
okay,
inside the human body.
inside the human body, we knew in 1988 that we had a CB1 receptor. Soon after that, we learned that there was CB2 receptors. It wasn't until 1992, 91 that we understood our body made its own endocannabinoids, and the first endocannabinoid was named anandamide. And it comes from my country's language because ananda is a Sanskrit word and it means eternal joy, bliss.
How about that?
What concept?
Yeah, how about
And
that?
so when Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, I love his story when he says, I could not find the proper word in the Hebrew language for joy. There was plenty of words for sorrow, but not the appropriate word for joy. That's why he went to the Sanskrit language. And I feel even more prouder that it's coming, the plant comes from us, the plant's explaining are what it's supposed to be. And I call it balance. Balance.
Well, and there are so many different places we can go with this, and I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail. And I'm a talker, so I'm having to bite my tongue because there's so many points where I want to jump in. But I coming from the political area. I love this country. I do not care for the government because I do not believe that the government is representative of what the founding fathers put in the documents that we have. Um, but this is just how I operate anyway. Is I assume I'm free. I assume that I'm free. I know that there are certain rights that are enumerated in this, but not all of them. Just certain rights, and it says among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I don't have a bar or a degree. I've found easier ways to do those things other than having student loans. So call me a slacker, but that's just whatever it is. But from my understanding, if you can pull anything from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, even though it's not enumerated in the Constitution, you have a right to it. So I'm a lay person. So let's see if I'm correct about this. If you have lungs and they require oxygen for you to live, and Nick comes and puts a pillow over your face to deprive you of oxygen, something your body needs because you were born with lungs, that's murder. I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree that that's murder. And so when I discovered the endocannabinoid system, I was like, wait a minute. You mean that the human body has a system that requires this plant, but the state has stepped in to prevent us from having it? Isn't that attempted murder? And in the cases where we've lost people like you and myself, isn't it murder in my mind?
Well, it's at the where I feel is that it's just unacceptable. It's not acceptable to me in this day and age, and yet we let it continue. And meanwhile, we're facing an opioid epidemic, and it's not going away. And the numbers last year in 2021, we lost over 100,000 people. And prior to that, it was 75,000 people. And it's been escalating. And you talk about what we're allowed to do. I remember being called into a room in 1996 in Charleston, South Carolina, and we were told pain had become the fifth vital sign. And therefore, we were given charts. I still remember this, the happy face charts that everybody knows today. And the pain scale of 0 to 10. Where's your pain on 0 to 10? Or point to the face where you're at. And if their pain scale was 5 or more, 5 or more, they got 10 pills of Oxycodone. Oxycontin was written, and we didn't even have to write those scripts up. They were stamped for us. We just had to put our name on it. And we all had a mug. The one to start with, the one to stay with, Oxycontin.
Right.
I still remember this as my thing imprinted in my head. Talk about things. And this was legally allowed. And still, veterans, patients, people on disability get this covered by their insurance company through our healthcare system. There's that word system again, right? So as a doctor, we were taught that there was a digestive system, a reproductive system, an endocrine system, and there's all of these systems, but never the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah.
Well, you say, okay, we didn't know about it then. We do know about it now. Why isn't it still being taught? And I brought this up, and I want to see this as a mandated bill. Mandate. If we have the word medical in front of marijuana program, medical marijuana program, that's what the states have done. Why aren't they calling it a medical cannabis bill?
That's
Why are
interesting.
they still calling it marijuana?
Because that's a legal term. That's a legal term. And what's interesting about that is in New Jersey, they've recently legalized cannabis, but they actually still have marijuana illegal in New Jersey. So it's like, where are you guys?
It's just wrong. And this
Yeah.
is where I want to, again, focus on the fact that I want this bull crap, excuse my language, it's stupid to say medical and recreational. That's
Dr.
just
Uma,
wrong.
Dr. Uma,
It's
it's
just
bullshit.
wrong. It's just it's cannabis is for two purposes. It's medical use and industrial use. If we can make it as simple as that, that's how I want people to understand it. If you get ibuprofen and a doctor writes you a script for ibuprofen that you need a prescription for, versus you go buy your ibuprofen from CVS, Walmart, or wherever, and it's 200 milligram tablets, whatever it is, and you take 3 of them, it adds up to 600. If you take 4, it adds up to 800. But if you get it as a prescription and you get a pill as 600 or 800, it's covered by the insurance companies. What's the difference?
Right.
The same way I want people to understand that if you get it because you have a card and you get it and you use it because you don't have a card, it's still the same medicine. What you're using it for is still for you to feel at ease, to bring you balance. If you need more one day and less another day,
Well, we just, and everyone knows, I'm a member of the CannaSense Collective, and the process that I came through is, I saw a doctor via telemedicine who actually, they looked at all my ailments, what I was coming to them for, recovering from alcohol abuse syndrome, post-traumatic stress. I was recovering. Well, I was addicted to hydrocodone, and I recently watched a documentary on HBO about the hydrocodone oxycontin epidemic, where they were like, oh, it's the chances of addiction are very low, and I'm like, man, I remember when I bit into my first one, it was like that. So don't tell me it's non-addictive. That getting addictive is highly improbable. Yeah, it only takes a few minutes to
5 pills.
realize. Yeah,
5.
yeah. And I'm gonna tell you, that addiction took me by surprise. Drinking, I had to work at. You know what I mean? I had to build up to that bad addiction. But with painkillers, with opioids, no, it was instantaneous for me. Um, but so I was going to go into, because when I was a teenager, I would smoke a joint if you passed it to me, but I didn't really care for it. I was a drinker, so when I did come to a point in my life where I knew it was after my father crossed, and it was so much trauma that I knew I was either going to drink myself to death or blow my brains out or something. All I knew, Dr. Uma, was that my body cried out for cannabis. I just said, I need it. I have to have it. I know that if I don't get access to this somehow or another, I will be dead by the end of the week. You know, and of course that was before CannaSense, so I had to get it on the black market around here. But when the CannaSense came along, And I saw a board certified doctor, who actually took the time to educate me about the endocannabinoid receptor system, look at my symptoms and say, okay, you need this type of a sativa in the morning and an indica at night. And they told me about the different intake methods. They blew my mind because here in the South, and you know this, if you're getting it on the black market, it's either loud or shake. That's as far as education
Mhm.
goes, in the South.
Mid.
So, or mid, yeah, if you're lucky. So it's like, it really, my experience with it when the doctor educated me about it, I was like, wow, you know, how did my body instinctively already seemingly know this information somehow that made me cry out for it and then seek, a doctor that educated me that my feelings or my intuition was true about it. It's interesting how it works that way. But of course, I apply spiritual beliefs to the plant as well, so I don't mind going to those areas. But so now, I know that you hang out in Georgia a lot. Are you based in Georgia or Florida?
Well, it's really interesting. My home is here in Georgia, where I am today, and I came to Georgia in 2003 to work at Kimberly Clark, and then I went back to Massachusetts. Um, but home base is between Massachusetts and here. I had gone down to Florida to take my dad to get away from the snow and to really have another set of eyes look at him, and that's a whole nother conversation. But um, I am now licensed to practice in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, Georgia, and Washington. And I also write the recommendations for New Hampshire and Vermont. Because I'm licensed in Massachusetts, I can write for these other states as well. And my youngest patient in my clinic is 2, and my eldest patient is 98. And I love what I do. I have nothing to do with the insurance companies. I have nothing to do with a hospital. I have nothing to do with any type of um, taking payments at all. So hospitals, universities, and insurance companies are not my payees. It's the patients.
Right.
And you brought up a very important point that I want to touch on. You said my body craved the cannabis. And what we understand today is just like any other system, there's a balance. And people can be deficient or underactive system or an overactive system. And this is what people have to understand. We understand it with every other system if it's overactive or underactive. So if we can understand that the endocannabinoid deficiency is real, just like if you have a vitamin deficiency or you have an enzyme deficiency, these are real things that can happen to people. And what we've understood with cannabis is that Dr. Ethan Russo has even written about this as fibromyalgia, migraines, and IBS. By just supplementing with cannabis, symptoms are resolved.
Mhm.
What do you know? And I have MS patients, I have other patients with other illnesses. By just supplementing cannabis, we're seeing their symptoms be resolved. So we understand that this symptom is related to a deficiency. How we replenish it is different options. And also, why is your system being depleted? Or why is your system overactive? These are questions that we have to look at. We don't have all the answers. And this is where we definitely need more research. We need to understand the genetics. Why is one person need more, one person need less? What is it that for one condition, one method works a different way better than another? And this is why, to me, and to everybody out there, I explain cannabis use is personalized medicine. It's about you, all about you. And why I don't like this word recreational is because it takes away that the person is really getting a benefit and that it's working with their own endocannabinoid system. And this is why I want to mandate every healthcare provider must learn that we have an endocannabinoid system. And they must mandate this in every state that has a medical marijuana program. At least start there. Georgia has one. And this is why I want to support what's going on here in Georgia. And Georgia was one of the first places I started to speak out about because of Sharon Rayburn. Sharon Rayburn was looking for a doctor and she was working with normal and said, I need a doctor that can help here. And a common friend by the name of Aaron introduced us, and the rest is history. But I really believe that medical schools, and if not, every individual must be taught that we have an endocannabinoid system. And that's why my mission after my mother died was and is to change the stigma regarding cannabis and for the world to know about the endocannabinoid system. And I do it through education.
And it's funny. I mean, I never thought of it like that when I learned about the endocannabinoid system. You just gave me a gold nugget because I'd never incorporated my spiel when I've gone on radio shows and things like that to talk about cannabis and CannaSense and everything. I never thought of it as, you can have a deficiency. So thank you for that. But yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. You can have a
And
deficiency.
and this is why I want people to understand that this is a system approach. It's a systems approach is what I want people to look at it as. When we talk about reproductive system, the endocannabinoid system is involved. If we talk about the GI system, the endocannabinoid system is involved. When we talk about pain, the endocannabinoid system is involved. Every system in the body that I've looked at, the endocannabinoid system is involved with. So my mission began that, what am I going to really be able to do? What do I want the world to know? So I started to break it down into, I want everybody to know three facts that they should walk away with. Fact number one, the United States of America has the patent. Look this
Hmm.
up. Patent number 663507. And it clearly states cannabinoids, all of them, as an antioxidant and neuroprotectant. So the government has known of its value, not just for treatment, but for prevention. Remember, we
Hmm.
started this conversation about prevention, why I do what I do. They've known about prevention, maintenance, and treatment of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, stroke victims, cardiac issues. They've known about
And,
it.
and that's one thing I wanted to get into because by creating that patent and having these studies that they've done, they've implicitly taken it off of Schedule 1. So it's just a matter of them striking it down. I mean, it's because Schedule 1 says that there's no medical benefit.
Let's keep going on that. Let's talk about
So,
let's define what Schedule 1 means. Schedule 1 means that there's no medical use, no
mhm,
medical research, and a potential for abuse. And I'm going to
mhm,
give you the three facts to tell what we need to really learn about this. So that's the first one, which we said. They have a patent, so the research is there, and they know what its uses are. The second fact, this was prescribed by doctors. Doctors had the liberty. I don't have the liberty today. I can only write a recommendation
mm,
for this plant because it's in Schedule 1. And guess what? It was used in the pharmacopoeia. It was listed from 1850 to 1942. Opioid addiction, alcoholism, insanity, gout, pain, menstrual cramps, typhoid, even tuberculosis. Back then they had diarrhea. All of these things was what cannabis was used for. They
mhm.
know about it and it was prescribed. The third, an important fact is that nobody in the whole world has ever died from a cannabis overdose.
Ever, ever, ever.
I'm going to add one more sentence to that. This past week, I saw one of the scariest things that I've ever seen. And it was with a patient that tried to use cannabis RSO and overdid it. Yet they did not die. They were going through DTs and they decided to start using cannabis. And I'm proud of them for wanting to do this. But again, it shows that when you're going through things like alcohol withdrawal, and especially if you've been drinking hard liquor, you cannot go cold turkey. You cannot. You can end up with what's known as delirious tremors. And it's almost like watching somebody go into a seizure.
Mm.
That's the closest way I can describe it.
Yeah.
And it was scary. We ended up having to take him to the ER. But even the ER doctor, I had to explain to him, he's not going to die because of the cannabis. He's going to die. Maybe he's going through withdrawals, but not because of the plant. And here I am trying to explain this in an ER while this patient is going through this. So with that, I want to follow up with two very important words: conscious use. I'm pushing these two words globally now. I don't care what you're going to do. You must have a conscious use of whatever you do.
Mm.
If we don't have a conscious use of it, we've got a problem. We've got a real problem. It could be with alcohol, it could be with food, it could be with sex, it could be with anything that you decide to do in your life if you don't have conscious use of what you do.
Yeah.
So we've given you the 3 facts why cannabis does not belong in Schedule 1. Lies, lies, lies. 3 facts that you could go home with today. Okay?
This is what we say, Dr. Uma, at CannaSense is the slogan. The CannaSense slogan is cultivating responsible use. But I've always said to people, I go, look, for one, the law is just another form of magic. It's just somebody writes something and then and within a generation, people go, oh, okay, that's just the way that it is. But speaking of the Schedule 1, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the requirements for a substance to be on the schedule is to have no known medical use. Well, along with the patents that the governments have purchased, it was April of 2017, the NIH, National Institute of Health.gov, so that is a part of the government, the federal government, and I always tell people, look, you have to think of the federal government as an octopus, right? It's one thing, but it has all these different alphabet arms, right? And so you have the DEA over here with their stupid schedule, which, by the way, none of that stuff is in this, which is the law, just saying. But the DEA has their schedule with their requirements. And over here, you have another tentacle called the National Institute of Health.gov. It is a part of the same entity. In 2017, the NIH, they released studies that cannabis does have known medical uses for reducing cancer, I think eczema, certain symptoms in mice. So it's like, I tell people, I go, listen, when they did that, well, really when they purchased the patents, they did it. But I go even to 2017. I said when they made any statement, the federal government by any entity, by any alphabet arm, that there was medical uses, by default they did remove it from the Schedule 1. Now, if you think that somebody from the NIH got on a little, Jetsons car and went over here to the DEA and said, "Excuse us, can you remove cannabis from your Schedule 1?" They don't do that. However, if you have two things at once, no known medical use is a requirement, but over here it's saying there's a medical use, then by default, it doesn't need to be removed from the Schedule 1. It's not on a Schedule 1. It's not the people's fault that they haven't changed their literature and that their enforcement agents are, they don't know how to adhere to this literature, which, when we've been harping about this a lot lately, it's like, this trumps every inferior law. This is the supreme law because it's based in spiritual truths. So it's like, I look in this and I go to the 18th Amendment and I see in the 18th Amendment where prohibition was instituted in this country, and it says alcohol, liquors, spirits. So that means that Congress, our entire gears of government, had to move, and we know how hard that is, to put an amendment in this document to prohibit alcohol, right? Then, of course, liberty won out in the end. Not that I approve of alcohol, but freedom is freedom. I don't have the authority to tell you to put poison or not poison into your body. That's your body. But their prohibition is ineffectual. It does the opposite of what they intended to do. So with the 21st Amendment, they repealed alcohol and liquors. But show me one single amendment in the supreme law that overrides every inferior law in any state, agency, county, or parish. Show me in this Constitution where cannabis or other plant sacraments or medicines were ever prohibited by a constitutional amendment. And if you can do that, then you have shown me that it is against the law. Now, I always tell people, I say, look, Marbury versus Madison, Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth versus Alabama are 3 Supreme Court cases that have never been overruled. You could look at Shepard citations and see check marks all the way down. Never overruled, never overturned. And those 3 Supreme Court cases, basically, when you put them together, they say this is the supreme law of the land. If any inferior entity, like a state or government agency creates a piece of legislation that contradicts this, that law is null and void of law. The citizen has no obligation to obey, and the state has no power to enforce. It is a fiction of law, not to be branded so in open court of law, but before the ink dries on the legislation. So, I try to find the simplest route to problems, which is, and we discussed this off air, and me, Nick, and Dave have been talking about this. It's like the activist fight to legalize and decriminalize is like, I get it. I'm on your team, sort of. I want access to cannabis, but the fight is kind of a distraction. You know what I mean? Now, education is really where the fight is. So we were on the same page there.
Mm-hmm.
I would just nudge the activists slightly off of their primary target, which is asking the state of Georgia specifically, because that's where I dwell, for permission. It's like, we know what governments are about. We know that it's about who's greasing whose pockets, or whatever the terminology is, lobbyists, and who's really answering to big pharma. We know that's what it's about. But as we were talking last night, Nick, it's like, if the problem is this, you have people like veterans who are dying every single day due to lack of access to this medicine. Okay, so that's the problem, and the solution is to get them the medicine as fast as possible, right? I find it a waste of time and resources to continually knock on Atlanta's door and say, can we have permission to give you, whatever money you're trying to get out of this, to create whatever regulations you're going to create, so that eventually veterans can get access to medicine. To me, it just seems like, I appreciate the fight, and I used to fight it that way, but it's like, with education and proper, understanding of law and some medicine, it's basically, there are easier ways, and I do think that right now it's certainly not asking politicians for permission. It's educating them that we already have a right to it,
Mhm.
and they can either get in line
Mm-hmm.
or miss out.
You bring up a thing, but the reality check is one of my jobs when I was working at the Hanford site, and I am today a medical review officer. Okay. So as a medical review officer, I'm a drug tester that when somebody works at a job, there's two types of drug testing, DOT and non-DOT, Department of Transportation and non-Department of Transportation drug testing. And when we were on a federal site, if you tested positive for this chemical known as THC, you had the potential of losing your job. Now that's still a reality check and it's slowly changing. I know I just saw Amazon doesn't test their people for THC anymore.
Hmm.
And they're slowly understanding that if they don't check for it, then that's not an issue. And that's what slowly, they're trying to still walk around with this one eye blinded, okay? And I think that's also wrong. Let's face the facts. Cannabis is not the same as alcohol, not,
Mhm.
okay? And I want people to understand this. They're trying to, even our laws now, they had open container. The freak is open container of cannabis.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, what are we correlating open container to cannabis for?
That's a new one on me. That's really a
Oh
thing.
yeah, that
That's
was the
insane.
verbiage that they used in Massachusetts, okay?
Wow.
So this is why they're still not understanding, and I've tried to educate my colleagues. If you freaking understood the endocannabinoid system, we would have a discussion. But since you don't know that you have an endocannabinoid system and that cannabis works with the system, and you cannot equate the two the same. It's not like, well, one alcohol drink is going to put your blood level at this amount, two alcohol drinks is going to put your level at this much, and 1 hour later, that's not how this works. Does not compute to these people.
Yeah.
So why don't you freaking learn or ask people like myself or yourselves, how does this work? So I get a little perturbed about this. The Jersey in me comes out because I'm like, honestly, cannabis is a fat soluble element. Alcohol is used, it's metabolized, but it's different. And that's why alcohol can be out of your system within hours. Cannabis stays in your system, even if you've not used it. And the bigger you are, heavier fat content, less metal, it can vary. I have people 3 months that haven't smoked weed, but because they were users of it and heavy, it's still in their system. It can be in their system. And this is why you have to understand the system. You don't want me coming and fixing your electrical systems or your plumbing systems. Fix things. I don't know if you're going to like what I end up with, but that's not what we should be doing when it comes to cannabis. And this is why I have spoken in so many countries, and I will go and speak in front of senates and wherever I can, because I tell the politicians, step aside. Unless you got an MD behind your name, you really should not be taking care of patients and advising about it.
Right.
And the next phase of this is educate, embrace, and empower, because we've got to educate people. We've got to embrace the concept that this is a safer option than opioids and alcohol, and people are self-medicating, folks. They're self-medicating with much more dangerous things. Cannabis is much safer. So that's why Dr. Uma says, safety first, do no harm. And I've said this all over. We were taught do no harm. But when you're writing out an opioid prescription with no exit plan, you got a problem, Houston. And that's why I call cannabis the exit drug. It's my registered trademark. So for everybody out there using that, please at least give credit to where it came from. Not start spending $1, send $1 for every time you use it. It's the exit drug is my quote, and we call it the exit drug and not a gateway drug.
Right.
If anything, it's an entrance to a better quality of life, and it's an exit from pharmaceuticals, narcotics, alcohol, and nicotine, and my list is growing.
Absolutely. And we've been going at it for an hour. I could keep going and would like to. How do you feel?
I think we can maybe try to wrap it up so that maybe we can leave some points for people, and then we can always come back and revisit this.
Yeah,
And,
because what we like to do at Zen in the Car is we're all spiritual people of different proclivities. So we've killed an hour of talking about the medical side, which is wonderful. But I also want to get into it. We could do it on another episode with you, the spiritual aspects and the spiritual applications of the cannabis plant and other plant-based, sacraments. In my opinion, they're sacraments. But because from my point of view, Dr. Uma, as a recovered Southern Baptist, I think that a lot of the problems in specifically Georgia, because I did come up through, simultaneously through the organized Christian church and politics, uh, and I started to see correlations between the two of what the church was teaching, that the scripture, I mean, they were butchering what the scriptures actually, because I'm looking in Genesis and I'm like, it says everything that bears its own seed is an herb and it's good for meat for you. It's good for you. You're supposed to put it into your body. But the guy behind the pulpit is saying it's something that it's evil. You know what I mean? But then when I look at the Hebrew word for sorcerer, it's actually where we get the word pharmacy from. Pharmakia. I was like, this is confusing me. So I'm recovered from Baptist. But I would see a correlation between on Sunday mornings, they would get this type of a message about, cannabis from the church. And then on the next Saturday, they would go to their Republican meetings where most of them had seen each other at church. And they're making law there based off of that, what they were mistaught about what all scriptures say about these plants. Um, and that's a problem, and recently, I mean, I know there's been a lot of talk under the Gold Dome about it, and I've heard some people who I won't say their names, but I'm pretty sure they're of that thought pattern of cannabis through the lens of the misinterpretation of scripture, that is why they're so ardently fighting against it here in this state. And to me, it's just like, it's a well, it's a crime is what it is. It's a crime. But
unacceptable, and I feel it's, in this day and age, it's much safer. And one of the things I've been saying is Dr. Uma says CARES is we're going to establish this as our nonprofit. And CARES stands for choices, alternatives, research, education, and solutions. Because you're right, there's so many different things that are out there that has been around for thousands of years, and we are coming to, even now, psilocybin is a big thing that my patients, and we can have a whole, there's so many different things, but one statement that I say is Dr. Uma says, food is medicine and cannabis is food and medicine. And I love acronyms, and one of the things that I've said is the plant is for 5 P's. It's for people, it's for pets, it's for the planet, it's for peace, and for profit. And this profit is not just money and jobs, it's your health and wellness, health and wellness. And no amount of money can give you that.
It's true.
No amount of money. So that's where the 5 P's come in. And we want to, we want to put this on t-shirts so people can say, what does the 5 P's mean? And we could start explaining that this plant, if we could feed it to the people, feed it to the produce and our animals that we consume, they wouldn't be inflamed, we wouldn't be inflamed. The planet, if everything plastic could be made from hemp, imagine where our world would be. If we could stop making cannabis, decriminalize it throughout the whole world. Decriminalize it is what I've asked. Deschedule it and decriminalize it is what I've been screaming at the top of my lungs. It doesn't belong on any schedule, and people should not be criminalized for having this as a possession.
True.
Yeah.
And ultimately, everybody out there has a day that we will rest in peace. I call it whip to rip. We're all a work in progress. We're all going to rest in peace. And I want people to die with dignity. And I want this plant as an option. And not only for the person that's dying, but the person left behind. Because that person also suffers with PTS.
Yep.
And if you can see that your loved one die with dignity, it gives you a peace as well.
And it's so funny you say that because my work with CannaSense, it started with losing my father because of lack of access, and then my mother crossed over because of end-stage COPD, and because of CannaSense, I've said it so many times, and you just said it. She was allowed to cross over with dignity because of that medicine. Because without it, she couldn't eat or enjoy anything. She couldn't breathe. But when she would take an indica through a vaporizer, she could eat and laugh, and she did. She crossed over with dignity, and so it's it. We're all on the same page. But so we do want to have you back for
We
so
will
many more
definitely, and I'd
episodes.
love to just leave with a couple of things that I want to say, where to get a hold of me.
Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead and give us your website, your any way that go ahead, plug away.
all of it.
Plug away is right. I'm Dr. Uma Dhanabalan. What a pleasure. I want to thank both you and Danielle and Nick for being here today and taking the time. And I want to thank everybody that's out there listening, because each of you make a difference. And my philosophy is reach 1, teach 10, teach 1, reach 10, because the word has to be spread, and it's not going to be all through doctors. You can reach me at 508-444-2324. Our email is upliftinghealthandwellness@gmail.com. And that's our website too, upliftinghealthandwellness.com. And I am here to do consults for people all over the world. I do that. And I'm also a primary care doctor. If you need a family doctor, if you need just to run by your numbers and look at your labs, I'm here for you. But I'm here, and I love what I do, and I'm proud of what I do. And we're very blessed, and cannabis truly is the exit drug, and it must be a first line option and not the last resort.
We agree with you. So we're looking forward to the next one. Oh, and are you going to be at the event in Atlanta on the 23rd, or yes, no, the Cannabis Conference?
I don't know much about it yet.
I'll try to get you there. How about that? I'll
That
pull some
sounds like a
strings.
plan.
So I think this is contextual and appropriate because it's one of my favorite words, namaste.
Namaste.
Yeah,
And
and
I
we'll
love
see.
it. Namaste became a nice way, especially with COVID, because in India, this is how we always say hello and goodbye. So, and it's a way of not making contact with somebody if they don't want to, and showing them respect as well.
Right. Well, much respect from us to you, Dr. Uma, and namaste once again. We'll have you back. All the links will be in the Christ box below.